So my message is when the crisis hits the Christian. Merrill Unger, who is he was a biblical scholar, he wrote, "In the case of God's servants, suffering is never pointless." In the case of God's servants, suffering is never pointless. I would add to that, I would say in the case of any person, God never allows suffering to be pointless. He always uses hardship. God never wastes anything. Never. In the years that I've done ministry with children, teens, adults, I'm often asked one question. Why does God allow bad things to happen? Have you ever asked that question yourself? I know I have. Some variation to that question. Sometimes it's changed a little bit, but that's the basis of it. It's the grand question, why? Remember that even when Jesus, when he was nailed to the cross, he's crying out and he says, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani?" My God, why have even you forsaken me? Of the worst, even Jesus is crying out, "Why have you forsaken me?" When times of crisis happen, when they happen, we squirm and we resist and we weep, we mourn, we become angry, and we will ask why. Why is this happening, God? This was not the way it's supposed to go. I'm going to be reading from 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 16 through 30. I want to make note, though, that in the book of 2 Corinthians, you read the Apostle Paul talking about difficulties, hardships, sufferings over and over and over. It's something that he is full aware of and has experienced. Starting in verse 16 there of chapter 11, Paul says, "I repeat, let no one think me foolish, but even if you do, accept me as a fool, so that I too may boast a little. What I am saying with this boastful confidence, I say not as the Lord would, but as a fool. Since many boast according to the flesh, I too will boast. For you gladly bear with fools, being wise yourselves. For you bear it if someone makes slaves of you, or devours you, or takes advantage of you, or puts on airs, or strikes you in the face. To my shame, I must say, we were too weak for that. But whatever anyone else dares to boast of, I am speaking as a fool, I also dare to boast of that. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the offspring of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I am a better one. I'm talking like a madman. With far greater labors, far more imprisonments, with countless beatings, and often near death. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Let me stop here and just explain real quick. When he received the lashes of 40 minus 1, Jewish law said that somebody could be punished by lashing them to a post and whipping them 40 times. They were so concerned about breaking the commandment that they would do 39 times. Okay? So 5 times he's been whipped, 39 times. Then 3 times he was beaten with rods. That was actually a Roman form of punishment. So he doesn't say this was from the Romans. The church in Corinth would understand that. So he was beaten with rods 3 different times. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea on frequent journeys. In danger. Now notice the in danger. In danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from the Gentiles, danger in city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers. In toil and hardship through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst often without food, in cold and exposure. And apart from other things, there is the daily pressure on me of the anxiety for all the churches. Who is weak and I am not weak? Who is made to fall and I am not indignant? If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. Wow. And I thought I didn't sleep well last night. This is the Word of God, though. You see, Paul is writing to the church there in Corinth. They've encountered these men called super apostles. They're like super preachers. And these guys come in and they say, oh, we want to tell you about our great things. Well, we'll tell you about Jesus, but we want to tell you about what we've managed to do. We're just doing life great. Everything is wonderful. Everything is great all the time. And now they are making fun of Paul because, why? Suffering. Paul has suffered a great deal. And so now these other super apostles come in and they say, oh, this apostle Paul, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Look how much he's been through. So Paul says, okay, they can brag, I'll brag. But what does he brag about? If you note, he has a heavy sarcasm in verses 19 through 21. He says, you gladly bear with fools, being wise yourselves. For you bear it if someone makes slaves of you, or devours you, or takes advantage of you, or puts on airs, or strikes you in the face. To my shame, I must say, we were too weak for that. We were actually too weak to make you fools. And then when he says he's going to boast, he actually counts against boasting. In verse 16, he says, accept me as a fool, so that I too may boast a little. Fool, boast. In verse 17, what I am saying with this boastful confidence, I say not as the Lord would, but as a fool. Verse 21, I am speaking as a fool. I also dare to boast. Verse 23, are they servants of Christ? I'm a better one. I'm talking like a madman. So he's saying, if I'm going to brag about anything, it's going to be about suffering. But in all honesty, bragging, it's just foolishness. That's all it is. Let me ask you something, church. Will you boast when those times of crisis hit your life? Can you boast in those really hard times in life? Would you say something like this? You know, I've got some people that have turned against me. They're after me. I'm going to brag about that. They're going to cut me down. Man, it's going to be awesome. No, we wouldn't do that, would we? Not naturally. When those unforeseen events happened and it nearly ruined me, I'm going to boast. I'm going to brag. When all that I thought that I had was ripped from my hands, I will boast. I will brag. It doesn't sound right, does it? It doesn't make sense to us. You see, Paul says that all boasting is foolishness, except the boasting of those crisis times. Why? Because we can boast about our weakness. Counterintuitive to the world. In verse 30, Paul says, if I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weaknesses. How contrary to this world. Here we're Custer County. Have you ever heard a bull rider say, yep, I made it the whole 8 seconds. And his buddy says, I didn't even make it out the gate. The bull didn't buck, nothing happened, I just fell right off. Yes! I should get the biggest buckle for that one, I'll tell you right now. You won't hear that, will you? I sure didn't hear anything like that over here at the fairgrounds this last weekend. Nope. Have you ever heard a runner say, yeah, of all the runners in that race, I was dead last. Woohoo! Yeah, where's my trophy? You don't hear it, do you? No. Make sure that you understand something. God does not call qualified people. He doesn't call successful ones to do His work. He calls the weak. He calls the bull riders who can't even make it out the gate. He calls the runners who finish dead last. He calls the ones that everybody else says, no. No, not them. No. Moses, Abraham, Gideon, David, Samuel, Rahab, Elijah, Isaiah, Peter, John, Hosea, all of them were weak. All of them admitted weakness. And God used them in a mighty way. Christ Himself took the form of a servant, as we know in Philippians 2:7 it says, rather He made Himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. The King of all kings comes to earth and becomes a servant. He becomes the last, the least. You see, when crisis hits, we either say, I am strong enough, Or we say, I cannot do it. And when we're honest with ourselves and with God, and we say that we are weak, we cannot do it, and we cry out to Him, He meets us right there. He meets us right there. After C.S. Lewis's wife, Joy, passed away, he wrote this in one of his journals. God has not been trying an experiment on my faith or love in order to find out their quality. He knew it already. It was I who didn't. In this trial, He makes us occupy the dock, the witness box, and the bench all at once. He always knew that my temple was a house of cards. His only way of making me realize the fact was to knock it down. Here's another way of saying that. God always knew that I wasn't strong enough. His only way of making me realize the fact was to shake my life to pieces. I know in my life there have been those times that I thought that I was plenty strong. And God, in His grace, in His infinite grace, helped me to realize that I was not as strong as I'd like to think I am. We continue to read about how Paul and how God used great difficulties to prevent pride in his life. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul has been given a vision from God. It's an amazing thing that Paul has seen. And so in verses 7 through 10, he addresses this. He says, to keep me from becoming conceited, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. I want to explain to you what Paul probably looked like at this point in his life. He is probably frail. He is probably stooped. More than likely, he walked with a limp. He is covered in scars from head to toe. His eyesight is not good, and there's not glasses to help him see well. So when he holds up the Torah, he has to hold it like this, or like this. He can't hear well. Aging has taken its effect, as well as beatings. They would box their ears, which ruptures eardrums. So he can't hear well, so you have to shout at Paul. And he is broken, he is weary, and it is hard for him to travel. Remember, much of their travel in that day was by foot. And so Paul limps as he goes from one church to the next. This is the great apostle Paul. And he's bragging about weakness. I want you to note something there in that last section that I read from chapter 12. Paul's affliction was not taken away by having enough faith, nor by prayer. Have you ever had somebody tell you, well, if you pray enough, if you have the right faith, then that's going to pass away from you? No. No, it was given to him so that the power of Christ may rest on him. When Jesus and His disciples go into the Garden of Gethsemane, it was there that He prayed how many times? 3 times. That perhaps this cup will be taken away from Him, that He won't have to go to the cross. He says, but nevertheless, not my will, but Thy will be done. Father, I want Your will to be done, no matter what. I ask myself how many times I've prayed that a difficult time would be taken away. Maybe I'm actually praying that I will be strong enough and I won't need Christ in my weakness. I want to pray that I will be my own little God. You see, Paul is content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and difficulties, because when he's weak, then he is strong. Not because of himself, but because of Christ alone. Your real strength is not found in your ability to make it through those hard times. Sorry. It's not about you being strong enough. You see, God has the ability to cripple anyone at a moment's notice. That phone call can come, and we get that news, and we are devastated. It has happened to me. And we are brought literally to our face on the ground saying, God, why? 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 He doesn't leave us there. No, I would even challenge that that is God's grace for us. That He uses, I've talked of Job and what he experienced. God uses the most difficult of times to make us into who He wants us to be. You see, God has a perspective of eternity that we have no comprehension of. We only get small glimpses throughout the Scriptures. We understand life as these 70, 80, 90 years here, right? No, God sees a much grander scale, and He is preparing us for that. No different than as a good parent, you discipline your child. You teach your child, no, don't do that. This is wrong, and there is discipline. And the child may weep because of the discipline, but you know what is best for that child. But in a much greater and grander scale, God knows for us, His children, what is best for us. And we are squirming and we're saying, no, why? Why? And He says, I'm not going to tell you why, but I will tell you my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. In weakness. Your strength is not found in your ability to make it through those hard times. Your real strength is found in your inability to make it through, so you turn to Christ. That's where your strength is found. Your real strength is found in tears. Your real strength is found on your knees crying out to your Heavenly Father. That's where real strength is found. That is where real strength is found. Remember, at the first glance, the cross was a sign of defeat for Christ. Right? They see Jesus hanging on the cross. His disciples even ran. It's defeat. But because of a much greater plan that God had, the cross is not a sign of defeat for one. It's a sign of victory for all who believe in Christ. You see, now we look back in retrospect and we see that. Can you imagine being one of the 12 disciples and seeing the one who you think is going to save you from Rome, and now he's hanging up there naked, he has been beaten to shreds, and he's dying on the cross? Is that who you're going to follow? Is that your Messiah? No, he's defeated. It's over. Let's go, guys. But what happened when Jesus came back? Those cowardly disciples became roaring lions for the gospel. And they changed this world because of the power of Christ in them. Are you weak? Admit it. Guys, it's going to be hardest for you. It's hard for me to admit that I'm weak. It's hard for me to admit that sometimes I just can't physically do stuff. I used to be able to do stuff, but now I don't know what's wrong with me. I just can't. I don't like to admit it. I want to say that I need a bigger chainsaw, but I probably don't. I need a smaller one. It's easier to manage. No, when we're weak, we admit it, we turn to Christ, and we let Him do great work. Remember, the Apostle Paul was not physically able anymore to carry on this great mission. It was the power of Christ resting on him in this weakness, and Christ carrying him through the physical problems, through the emotional problems, through the spiritual weight that he carried. Christ carried him through. In my daily devotion, I am finishing up the book of Acts, where it records the final days of the Apostle Paul. Amazing how he just went before governors and emperors and kings. And every time I can imagine this frail man who has just been beaten so many times, in prison so many times. And now he's standing before them and saying, this Christ who I preach, He is real. I forgot to mention there was one time that Paul was beaten so badly in Lystra that they actually took his body outside the city gates and they dumped it. And it was from there that he got up and he started walking again to continue preaching the gospel to people who needed to hear it. I know that, like C.S. Lewis said, it is much easier to say my tooth aches than my heart is broken. I know that sometimes our hearts break, and for some of you now, your heart is broken. But remember, His grace is sufficient. It's okay to say that you're weak. It's okay to say that you don't have it together. It's okay to say that you're not strong enough. It's okay to mourn. His grace is sufficient. His grace is sufficient. His grace is sufficient.